Hi everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers because this workshop is super interesting, very nice. Okay, so my name is Francesca Foliano. I come from England, and today I'm going to present some results from a project with my colleagues at King's College London, Rebecca Riley, and the Office for National Statistics, Lynsey Brown. So the aim of this project is basically trying to understand work in the post-pandemic period. And of course, working from home and the shift towards working from home is a big component of the new settings in terms of work. So we try to understand how work has changed by using new and newly available time use data that have been collected by the Office for National Statistics. So up until before the pandemic, the UK did not have a kind of systematic collection of time use data the way the US has got with the ATUS data. And now the Office for National Statistics, together with ESCO, is trying to kind of fill this gap by ensuring like a systematic collection of this type of data. Okay, so before talking about how work is changed and how working from home has affected the way individuals use their time, I think I should give a little bit of background about working from home in the UK. So here I plot the proportion of individuals who report working from home in the annual population survey, which is a national representative survey that is collected by the ONS. As you can see, before the pandemic, there was a pretty stable trend for the 10, 12 years before the pandemic. Like men and women report around 16%. 16% of men report working from home, mainly or partly, and around 10-11% of women report working from home. After the first 2 months of 2020, with the introduction of the first strict lockdown and then the following 2 strict lockdowns, we see that this proportion steadily increases up to reaching around 30 to 33%. Very interestingly, also, the gap between men and women working from home kind of closes down. Okay, so given this premise, we know that the UK has been, together with some other countries, one of the places that has experienced the most the biggest and most permanent shift towards working from home. I probably don't need to motivate to you as a crowd why it's important to study more working from home. But let's say that working from home has several implications for employees, employers, and policymakers in terms of well-being, productivity, urban organization. And on top of that, we saw like a vast body of research that shows that actually workers are willing to forgo part of their earnings or earnings growth in order to actually work from home. Therefore, understanding a bit more why workers want to work from home is a pivotal issue, I think. And time use data kind of can open a little bit of a window on why that's the case. Okay, so here we try to answer 4 main research questions. One probably is less interesting for you. The first, that is, we want to understand whether this new systematic collection of time use data can be used to track the trends in working from home. And the reason is because the UK doesn't have many repeated collection of data. So having multiple sources to try to track this behavior is important. Secondly, most importantly, we want to understand whether working from home kind of affects the way individuals allocate their time across different activities, and also whether there are implications for enjoyment. What I call enjoyment is the instantaneous enjoyment, the way individuals feel about an activity they are kind of implementing in the moment, and also on self-perceived productivity and more generally on well-being. And finally, whether there are gender differences. Gender is always my main interest, but is particularly interested in the context of working from home, because we know that working from home might kind of drive or increase gaps that already exist. Okay, so what I do in this paper, very simply, is we use this new time use data to kind of produce a descriptive analysis of differences in time use patterns between individuals who report on the day working from home versus individuals who report working from the office. We also, as I said, for work, but also for all the other main activities during the 24 hours. We also try to understand whether there are differences in, as I said, enjoyment, self-perceived productivity, and well-being. Okay, I skipped the contributions. Okay, data. Let me talk a little bit about this data because, so for part of this data, we've been helping with the collection and we feel very proud about them. So as I mentioned before, the ONS started collecting new time use data from April 2020 because they understood that it was very important in the moment of the implementation of the first strict lockdown to understand how people were using their time. So since April 2020, there have been 9 waves of collection of time use data. The last was in March 2025. The respondents are sampled from the NatSem panel. So far, we have around 7,500 diaries of individuals who are employed for weekday diaries, so individuals who are employed and report at least 4 hours of work in each diary. For these particular results that I will present today, I will focus on the post-pandemic period, which is from November 2022 to March 2025. And this includes around 4,400 diaries. So what is quite important about this collection is that respondents who agree about answering this survey are given 2 random days, 1 weekday and 1 weekend day. And they have to report their time use during those days. They cannot change the days. They can, and if they report a different day or if they report less than 2 days, they are dropped from the sample. So their diaries are not included. What is interesting about these time use data, of course, time use data record the primary activities, that is the main activity you are doing, the respondent is doing over 24 hours, but also secondary activities, where secondary activities are kind of things, some sort of, you can think about it as multitasking, whether you're doing something while you are actually kind of also conducting your main activity. These diaries also collect instantaneous enjoyment, that is how much individuals are enjoying on the spot the activity for each episode reported in the diary over 24 hours on a scale of 1 to 7. And then also we added a question in the last couple of ways about self-perceived productivity. I'll show you a little bit about how we did that in the survey. So we kind of collect information about self-perceived productivity. This question is asked every time the individual reports 1 episode of paid work. So if there is an episode of paid works, individuals receives a pop-up that asks about enjoyment and productivity. I'll show you in a second. These surveys also collect a comprehensive set of socioeconomic characteristics. Several respondents respond to more than 1 diary, more than 1 wave. However, at the moment, I'm treating the waves as kind of different cross-sections, so I'm not exploiting the kind of panel dimension. Finally, we think that time use diaries are kind of gold standard to kind of track behavioral changes, particularly because they minimize the recall bias and are less influenced by social desirability. This is the way we see this type of data. Okay, so this is just to show you how we collected information about enjoyment and self-reported productivity. So until wave 7, this pop-up window would open every time an individual was selecting 1 episode and was only about enjoyment. So for each episode, individuals had to report enjoyment between, how much they enjoy the activity between 1 and 7. In the last 2 waves, we added the second part of the pop-up where we ask only for when individuals report paid work. In this case, is paid, you can see from the window, is paid work from home, whether they felt productive. And the way we define this productivity is with 5 values, whether they are 100% productive up to less than 70% productive. Okay, this is just very quickly to show you how we use time use diaries to kind of add an additional measure of working from home and track working from home over time. Here, I report the proportion of diaries that report working from home, either any time working from home, at least 4 hours, or the whole time working from home for the 9 waves, and I compare them to the most recent available pre-pandemic time use survey that was collected in the UK in 2015. As you can see, there is a big change between 2015 and the pandemic. The proportion of diaries reporting working from home increased and then kind of stabilized after November 22. So November 22 to March 25 is when we are focusing the results I'm showing you today. Okay, more importantly, we want to understand how time across different activity differs between individuals who report on the day working from home versus individuals who report working from away from home. We do so by running separate regressions for each type of activity. What we do is basically running 10 regression, as I said, one for each type of activity, where on the left-hand side we have number of minutes for each diary spent in each activity, and on the right-hand side we have an indicator for working from home, gender, the interaction between the two, and a comprehensive set of individual characteristics. Here I report the estimated coefficients expressed as percentage differences relative to the mean number of minutes for each activity reported by non-working from home workers, in order to give like a sort of magnitude to evaluate these coefficients. So basically, just to be clearer, if we look at sleeping, we see that individuals who work from home or individuals who report on that diary that they're working from home that day, they sleep around 7.5% more than individuals who report working from the office. This is for men, and around 4% more for women. What is more interesting, of course, is that they report around 76% and 71% less time in transport, as you can imagine, and they seem to trade this saved time to spend more time in unpaid work. This is true for both men and women, and unpaid care, again, this is true for both men and women. In terms of magnitude, both basically men and women spend around 20 minutes more per day working in unpaid work if they work from home. So this is this 38% is around 25 minutes. Then we also saw the women spend more time watching television. Watching television, like individuals report a lot of time watching television or Netflix, or it's quite daunting actually to see it. And it's crazy. I mean, if you look at this, yeah. Anyway, and so women report spending a bit more time, and in terms of leisure, they seem to both men and women seem to spend more time in leisure related to well-being. Only for men, we find a very small negative coefficient for paid work. So they work around 20 minutes less per day if they work from home. But this is mostly driven by non-graduates working from home. If we separate the sample between graduates and non-graduates, graduates don't have this negative effect on, this negative coefficient on working from home. We do the same for secondary activities, what we call multitasking. Basically, we look at whether individuals report more time in other activities while at work. And if they work from home, and basically we find that individuals who work from home report more leisure while working, and both men and women. And in the case of women, we see like an increase in unpaid work. It's not massive; it's just around like something like 4 or 5 minutes, but still it's quite big in terms of magnitude, considering how much this is reported as secondary activity. Another interesting thing about time use is temporal flexibility, how individuals kind of arrange their working time over the day. I'm not going to go into the details of these estimation, but basically, if you look at the blue bandwidth, this is the 95 confidence interval of the estimated difference between the probability of being in work for every hour of the day over 24 hours between individuals who work from home and individuals who work away from home. And what we gather from this figure is basically individuals who work from home are less likely to work early in the morning, less likely to work kind of around lunchtime, but more likely to work in late afternoon, and in the case of men, sometimes late over the day. So there is some temporal flexibility. They rearrange their day, as you can imagine. Now, so far, we've seen, let's say, the positive aspects, which are about flexibility and kind of using the saved time from commuting towards things that they need to be done or things that they want to do. What about enjoyment, instantaneous enjoyment for working for paid work, in particular working from home versus working away from home? So what we do here is we try to rank preferences about activities. We do so by kind of running a regression where we have on the left-hand side the enjoyment for all the activities reported during 24 hours. So we have multiple observations for each diary. And on the right-hand side, we have the different categories of activities where the baseline is sleeping and personal care, because these are kind of essential activities that cannot be excluded from everyday life. What we find this way is that individuals seem to consistently prefer working from home compared to working away. Working away from home compared to working from home. We also find what is interesting about this is that we also find that traveling is quite disliked, as we can imagine, and as disliked as working from home. So in a sense, individuals who work from home don't seem to enjoy it, but individuals who work away from home enjoy it more, but kind of dislike the traveling. So a kind of trade-off. We can see a kind of trade-off here. Okay, what about self-perceived productivity? I mean, I'll let you guess, but what we find is that working from home is associated with a negative self-perceived productivity. And this is particularly true for men. If we look at the, here I report the self-perceived productivity as a continuous variable or for different cutoffs. And we can see that for the highest cutoff, which is being productive 100%, both men and women are around 5 percentage points less likely to report being being productive at 100%. Okay, so I think Seva, who just arrived, made a comment about this. Sorry, made a comment about these results, mentioning the fact that, of course, there is some selection, and is very linked to the comment that was made before about your paper. So it could be that individuals are less happy or enjoy less working from home, and they feel less productive because of a difference in tasks. We can't test that with the time use data we have that I used so far to show you something, but actually we use a different set of data collected by the ONS in 2024 among public sector workers. In these time use data, which are experimental and incredibly cool, individuals are asked to not only report their activities out of work in a kind of more aggregated way, just leisure, sleeping, personal care, but they're asked to actually say exactly how they spend their time during their work day. In a sense, like they have to say how they spend their time across different tasks. Now, this survey is run in a way that each public sector worker has to report 2 days. Here I focus on the subsample of individuals who report 1 day working in the office and 1 day working from home. And just descriptively, we can say that there is a big difference in terms of non-occupational specific tasks and time spent in non-occupational specific tasks between working from home and working from the office. So clearly, individuals who work from home spend more time in admin. And this, it's plausible to think that this might kind of drive the type of sense of less enjoyment or less self-perceived productivity. Okay, so just the very last thing about, okay, so far, so we've seen more flexibility in terms of time, probably better use of time, but also less enjoyment and less self-perceived productivity. What's the total effect purely observationally on well-being? We have in the survey 5 measures of well-being. We see that there's no, sorry, rather than effect association. What's the association between working from home and this measure of well-being? We see no association. Like individuals who work from home don't report less life satisfaction, less happiness, more anxiousness, or worthlessness. Okay, so very quick, I will conclude. I have 20 seconds. Remote work, persistent, possibly is driven by time saving and flexibility, but not necessarily enjoyment and productivity. And probably well-being benefits kind of arise from outside of work. Future research, definitely collecting more data, because I do think that task and time spent in task and type of tasks is very important in understanding why individuals enjoy maybe less working from home. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Yes.
on the temporal flexibility, I'd love to see it broken down by people with young children and those without, because there's lots of other evidence that suggests that it's people with young children that put an especially high value on the temporal flexibility. So it'd be good to see that chart broken down that way. I really want to see the question about self-perceived productivity. I mean, I've used these questions as well, but exactly how you frame the question is potentially quite important here.
Yes, so I have to say a little bit about this question. So the way it was framed, let me go, sorry, this is the way. Can you see the bottom of the pop-up where it says, during this time, roughly how productive were you? 100%, 90 to 99%, 80 to 89%, 70 to 79, and less than 70. So this question was originated by several focus studies that were done by the Cabinet Office in the UK, by the government.
During this time means during the time you're working at home on a job where you do both?
This question pops up for all types of work. Work from home, work away from the home.
So I see.
Every time an individual
every time you're working,
paid
right?
work.
I see.
Yes, every time.
Okay, got it. Okay, great. And the other thing, the other breakdown is married versus non-married on the enjoyment, well-being stuff. Is that
I don't. So I've done it because I have another paper on loneliness and time use, and so while during COVID that was crucial, this difference between married, non-married, parents, non-parents, and quite interestingly, women enjoy more time with others than time with the family. Kind of understandable sometimes, but in this case, for the period post-pandemic, I didn't see much difference. But thanks for the suggesting, because actually it's something I should add in the appendix to show this. Thank you. Yes.
Great. I had a question. This section is on mental health, but there's an interesting question on physical health. So just an observation, there's this old literature that people here probably know, where you look at countries which have exogenous retirement dates, like I think in Germany it was 60 and it went to 62. You see a big spike in mortality after retirement, and it just stays higher. So oddly enough, people think, oh, I'm healthier when I'm out of work, so I have all this time, but you don't, you know, there's a big increase in death rate for various factors. But if I look at your study here, I was thinking of physical health. The two things that people are spending more time on, one is sleep, which I think there's increasing evidence that actually most adults don't sleep enough. And the other is much more important, is exercise. So the like health evidence and exercise is incredibly positive, like unbelievably positive. And so, I mean, there's something just out I saw this week from Stanford saying, you know, there's no drug or therapy for many things, including multiple cancers, that is better than exercise. It's incredible. So, on physical health, it would be interesting if you had any evidence on this. Like,
yeah, so that's the result I showed. Is this what you mean in terms of time spent? So
no, I saw that. If you had physical health outcomes, so like you have mortality rates or visits to hospital, or anyone else has it.
We have some, I think is a rough measure on health. Thank you. No, I actually use it as a control, whether individual report any health problems. But no, we don't have. Also, since it's not a panel, we can't really track whether this change. But
there's basically conceptually a 2x2, work, not work. And if you are work on home, work in person. And it looks like the work, not work, you know, work is positive versus, at least the evidence I've seen, but then condition on working, this stuff is almost suggestive, at least some days at home because of time use. But it would be good to see this, I guess.
Okay, thank you, yes, good point. Thank you very much. Yes?
Yeah, actually, maybe really related to this, I think this is really interesting because you have to sleep more, exercise more. I'm wondering about whether they eat healthier. And I know I talked to Stephanie yesterday about, you know, whether you can see something about whether they spend time more cooking and doing things that might be actually good for them. But then on the other hand, they see less people. And I find it interesting to see this sort of contrast between the two papers of how, you know, the first three really should affect mental health as well in a positive manner. But then not seeing people is sort of playing a negative role. And I wonder if there is a way of putting all of this together.
Okay, I'll think about it. No, it's a very good point, yes. Yes, sorry. I thought someone...
Yeah, very interesting. So I remember these couple of papers by Ben Etheridge and co-authors on the UK. They were actually saying that at least during the pandemic in the UK, perceived as productivity was going up for remote workers. So that was specific of the pandemic. So how do you reconcile?
Sorry, which papers? By whom?
Ben Etheridge and co-authors.
Ben Etheridge.
Maybe also the question.
No, I don't know exactly the paper by Ben. I suppose he uses Understanding Society because this is what he usually uses. I don't know exactly. It's something I need to see.
To comment on this, one huge difference which you can see in your study is what you define work, because you can be 10% less productive at work, but you save 20% of your total work plus commute time. So it's like, this is huge, because if you look at, you're saving an enormous amount of time commuting, and people dislike it as much as they dislike work. So if you're 5% less productive in the office, but then you don't have to commute, you're actually net more productive, including commute time. So actually these questions, we've been looking into this with Jose a lot. It's not clear actually it's not clear what you want to define, but I think in your case, you're defining actual minutes worked, but you're excluding work commuting, which is often like, in fact, all these studies show commuting is typically hated even more than working. It's like people hate commuting.
So I also add one thing about that, is that in Understanding Society, the question is direct, like, oh, do you feel more productive working from home, if that's the data set used. Whereas here, the thing I was saying about the bias and the social desirability, the good thing about time use data is that people report things without really thinking about a direct question. They kind of have some implications. So they understand whether there are some implications to the question or not, and might respond in order to make the person asking the question kind of happy. So I think that's the main difference, and that's why we like to collect data. We did the same for AI. We added a pop-up question asking whether they use generative AI every time they report the time in work. So it's quite nice, because actually you get slightly different percentages compared to other studies that ask the direct question in a kind of questionnaire setting. Yes?
Can you break it out by type of job or occupation, and also whether they're a manager or non-manager? Because some of the activities like meetings and supervising, it might fit with some of the papers from yesterday about managerial monitoring and things like that. Because I thought job would be important.
I can definitely do that for the other paper, the one using the public sector time use survey, where we have very specific occupations as well as tasks. So yes, here we have occupations, but we have for the moment, we have a big proportion of missingness. And the reason is because the ONS uses an algorithm to code strings into occupations, but we're trying to solve the problem and kind of get 90%. Once we have that, that's the aim also, to look at by occupation, whether there are main differences, and particularly to understand whether self-perceived productivity has something to do with the type of occupation, or kind of is different. Yes, sorry. Sorry, I saw you before.
Super interesting. So we have some similar line of work in the United States. One thing we found is actually secondary childcare increase when both men and when people work from home. And then if you look at what they are doing when we look after children, it's basically watching TV. And then I think it would be super interesting if you could collect data on children's time use. I think.
Sorry, on children's?
In children's time use and well-being. I think that has been a gap in the data collection literature.
That is pretty difficult. Also because it's usually parents filling in the diary. So yeah, but no, it would be amazing. And that opens a whole other kind of research. Yes, finished. Okay. Just 1 minute. Any other question? Okay. Yes, sorry.
I just want to add something to the discussion. I think maybe a nice idea of like reconciling the previous presentation and your presentation could be like there's a future discounting bias, that in the moment people see the advantages of more sleep, more exercise, but that they underestimate the negative effect on the long term of like building social capital. So I think that's an interesting thought of like the difference between stated preferences and like the impact on mental health, and so
or immediate perception as well. Yes.
Yeah, that there's a kind of future discounting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning, all. It's nice to be here. Thank you very much to the organizers for having me here. I am Sumer. I am a computational media psychologist. I work at the Harvard Business School with Mike Norton and Ashley Whillans. I am a psychologist, not an economist, so excuse the razzmatazz on the slides. We tend to take them very seriously. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get started. I am preaching to the choir here, but it is important, I think, to set some common ground for this presentation. So let me start with what I hope will be a joke and not an overused cliche. But I found it really funny when back in the day, the CEO of Zoom essentially stipulated a return to office policy for the entire company, essentially arguing that Zoom's own revolutionary technology was not digitally rich enough to emulate in-person sociability. And this was ironic, but it was also emblematic of a significantly broader return to office mandates ranged across the big tech industry, really. And when CEOs were pressed about why they were insisting on this, they said something along the lines of sociability, creativity being amiss in hybrid models of work, particularly on remote days. And of course, we have scholars here who have argued that there are financial incentives in the CEOs making those claims. But it's also possible that the digital media technologies that we have at our disposal are just not sufficient for motivating or for emulating, the in-person sociability that in-person interactions offer. So let me, with that, dive into some past research and kind of assess if this is really the case. Obviously, we have a lot of research that suggests that hybrid work can actually improve retention. We know that people prefer working in the office for 3 days or so, and that nearly 21% of remote-capable workers are willing to take a substantial pay cut just to be able to work remotely. So we know that employees want this. But what we don't know is if the digital media landscape that currently exists is sufficient enough to offer the kind of interactions that constitute in-person interactions. And so that's going to be one of the primary focus of my talks today. So really, we have 3 key foci in the current presentation. The biggest one is looking at day-to-day sociability. I think this has been really nicely set up by the scholars who came before me and kind of wanting to study employees over time. We take it one step further. We don't just want time use. Time use is great. It's very valuable. But we want to examine employees multiple times a day, ask them rich psychological questions about their experiences, and understand if those constitute meaningful work experiences for them. And as a computational media psychologist, I was actually trained here with Gabby Harari at Stanford. I would be remiss if I didn't study digital media technologies in all the richness that these technologies exist in the workplace. So that's a second key focus for the current research. And really what we're interested in at the end of the day is asking this question as to if employees have become adept at managing their sociability in hybrid arrangements, right? So it's fully possible that the technological landscape does exist, but the question as to whether employees are good users of these digital media technologies is an open question. And this really requires us, from a researcher perspective, to unpack the microdynamics of hybrid employees' day-to-day sociability, both in person, but also on digital platforms. OK, so within this broad kind of umbrella concept of workplace sociability, we are particularly interested in what we call informal work interactions. And so Ashley has done a lot of formative research in this area, where she finds that, largely from qualitative evidence, that management consultants in this case reported that informal interactions selectively went missing during hybrid work or during fully remote work. And these interactions are essentially characterized by their ad hoc nature. They can occur in a variety of contexts. They don't have to happen in a meeting room. And in the absence of these interactions, workers kind of consistently alluded to missing out on a shared understanding or essential grounding work that they did with their colleagues in order to make meaningful progress on their work goals. Okay, and so I would like to emphasize here that you can clearly see from these results that there is an emphasis on a variety of contexts. So everything from Ubers to hallways, And so it seems that these interactions are context agnostic, really, and that seems to be a crucial part of what makes them unique. So drawing on a rich management science literature, OB scholars have studied this behavior for many decades. We kind of define informal work interactions in the following manner. So we define them as interactions that happen in passing that can help give employees a new perspective on their work. We can go into more detail about this if necessary, but they are work-related interactions. How that distinction is drawn should be questioned and interrogated further. But essentially, these are informal interactions, unplanned, ad hoc, spontaneous, and crucially, they are work-related. Okay, so that's kind of like our independent variable. What we care about in terms of workplace experiences and employees' experiences at work, we focus specifically on psychological safety. Psychological safety is a well-studied concept by Amy Edmondson. And essentially, she finds that having this ability to take risks without the fear of negative repercussions is a really crucial element of being productive and innovative at work. And for all the economists in the room, a lot of this past research has measured productivity in very objective terms, and it has found these robust correlations between increased feelings of psych safety and increased objective measures of productivity and innovation. Okay, so with all of that background, we have 3 research questions. So first, as the scholars before me have set up, diary studies. We study employees over the course of multiple work days, and that kind of allows us to introduce exogenous variability in their work locations, and that kind of allows us to ask if daily work location predicts just the frequency of informal work interactions that employees are having. And then we ask if these informal work interactions are meaningfully predicting changes in how they experience work and their work-related outcomes. And so essentially, the theoretical model is as follows in kind of one vein of thinking. Working from the office should be associated with an increase in the number of informal work interactions that employees have. I will go into a bit more detail as to why we suspect that might be the case. And an increase in informal work interactions should be associated with positive work experiences, as well as increased self-reported work outcomes. Now, the competing argument, which can also be fully plausible, is that employees are master users of digital media technologies, and regardless of whether they're working from home or not, they should be able to emulate the informal interactions that they have in the office on remote days using these digital media technologies. In which case, it's kind of really anybody's guess as to what's going on, and we might even expect to see a reversal of this conceptual model in terms of valence. Okay, so those are the 2 competing hypotheses, and now let me kind of dive into the sample that we collected data from. We collected data from hybrid employees. These hybrid employees provided nearly 5,000 observations multiple times a day over the course of 7 consecutive work days. We took some measures to ensure that employees were generally representative of hybrid knowledge workers in remote capable industries in the United States. So a lot of employees came from IT, financial services, insurance, and education industries. Importantly, these employees had to report working in a hybrid arrangement, so they had to spend at least 1 day in a regular work week working outside of their primary or secondary office and our client customer office at a third location, such as a cafe or their homes. And so I'm sticking on spending some time on this because so folks have a good idea of how we defined hybrid work, and it was kind of done very much in line with past gold standard research, thanks to everyone in this room. We were definitely and very much focused on employees who were physically located in the United States. We would expect meaningful cultural variations here, so it's important to set very explicit cultural bounds. Obviously, employees had to work regular hours, and they had to be remote capable. So essentially, we excluded employees who indicated being manual workers, laborers, or general staff, such as receptionists or cashiers, just because we wanted to have some kind of operationalization, as contentious as it might be, of knowledge workers, quote unquote, which the first 3 categories seemed to satisfy. Okay, so our survey strategy was as follows. So building upon a lot of the past research, we surveyed employees multiple times a day, once at noon, once at 3, once at 6, for 7 work days. Employees during each ping completed either a 5-minute or a 7-minute survey. The end of the day, 6 p.m. survey was the 7-minute survey, which included a wider battery of questions that we didn't ask during the workday, to prevent people from not working during our work surveys. And essentially, these daily surveys measured self-reported psychological safety, primary team trust, work engagement, work creativity, team learning behaviors, and crucially, we assessed the employee's daily work location, which was the location they primarily worked from at the day of the survey, the extent to which employees were physically co-located with their teams. So this is really crucial because even though employees can have office days, if their team is not physically with them in the office, they're actually going to resort to using a lot of digital media technologies, and some of the benefits of in-person work might be reduced because of a lack of physical team co-location. So that was a crucial variable for us. And then employees also reported on the frequency of their informal work interactions, and then they also told us about features of those informal work interactions, namely their interaction partners, whether or not these interactions happened in person, online, which channels they used to have these interactions, the extent to which the interactions were synchronous, so were they having rapid-fire text message exchanges with their managers, or was it something more inertial with a direct report, like an email, like a consecutive email exchange spanning tens of minutes as compared to a rapid exchange over text. And if these interactions were recorded and stored on organizational premises. So there is a lot of research in media psychology about how the recordability of interactions kind of influences their utility, the extent to which people are candid on channels that they know are being monitored. So we decided to measure some of this variability as well. I should say that all of these measures in classical management science have typically been used in single one-time surveys. We conducted 2 qualitative, so there was 1 qualitative diary study and 1 full-blown quantitative diary study that was used to validate these instruments, validate their psychometrics. I can go into details about that. And then in the 3rd study, when we were confident that our measures were actually capturing what we intended for them to capture, we deployed them in the full study. Okay, great. So for the results, what I'm going to present to you are person-level analyses. In these person-level analyses, we're comparing a person, an employee's psychological experiences when they are at work as compared to when they are at home. So these are within-person comparisons. They're conservative because we're averaging out whatever variance might be attributed to different people. But before that, sorry, my apologies, but before that, let me show you some descriptive statistics. And here the remarkable finding is that apart from the frequency of informal work interactions, we don't actually see meaningful differences in other features across remote and office days. So employees are more likely to have frequent informal interactions when they are in the office, but we don't see statistically meaningful differences across how they're having these interactions. So people use different digital media channels roughly equally, and quite importantly, the frequency of formal work interactions does not change much across remote and office days. But let me kind of go back to the theoretical model that I was talking about. So looking at these within-person mediations, we essentially aim to predict psychological safety just from employees' work locations that day. And we find that there is basically a strong direct quote-unquote effect. It's just a mediation terminology. It is not an effect. It is a positive association, just to be precise. And so essentially working from the office is associated with higher feelings of psychological safety at the daily level. And this association is partially mediated by the total number of the total frequency of informal work interactions that employees have that day. So in other words, working from the office is robustly associated with having more informal work interactions, and that in turn is robustly associated with an increased perception of psych safety. There is a lot to break down in this mediation. So essentially, let me just get into that in a minute, but I do want to emphasize that even though broadly there were no meaningful differences in the features of informal interactions across office days and remote days, there were some interesting findings with regards to using specific digital media channels and feeling different levels of psychological safety. So interactions that take place via video calls or instant messaging are usually associated with lower levels of psychological safety in comparison to in-person interactions. Okay, so that's pretty interesting, but let me break down the overall mediation into a more sequential set of analyses. So essentially, there is a very strong relationship between being in the office and being physically co-located with one's team. So this is most likely because a lot of offices have, they require the team to be physically co-located on specific days. So that's good news. People generally are coordinated in when they're showing up to the office. And being physically co-located with one's team is associated with having a greater number of informal interactions that day, which in turn is associated with increased psych safety and a range of positive work outcomes, all of which, to be transparent, are self-reported. Okay, great. Great, so with that, I would just like to summarize some of the contributions here today. So essentially, what we see is that first, and most importantly, constructs that management scientists have studied as relatively ossified constructs, as constructs that have been conceptualized as inertial over long periods of time, actually display meaningful variability over the short term, particularly in the era of hybrid work, where daily work location varies a lot, right, across days. And so this might be introducing more variability in workers' experiences as well as their perceived outcomes. And we really do see that where employees choose to work from every day is crucial for understanding some of this variability. Physical proximity to teammates and frequency of interactions seem to be important predictors. And in line with a rich tradition of digital media research, we find that digital media is not adequately substituting in-person interactions. Employees tend to have better informal work interactions in person, which are associated with meaningful work experiences. And so essentially, we need a combination of both. One could argue better digital media technologies, but also perhaps media literacy interventions that help hybrid employees use digital media technologies in a more meaningful manner in order to really get the best of both worlds that hybrid work promises to us. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because this ongoing research slide is slightly tangential, and let me just go here and thank my collaborators, and thank you all for listening to me, and I'll take questions now. Yes.
It's very interesting, thank you. I had two quick questions. I didn't totally understand the setting of where you were finding your survey participants from, but then I think the other thing that I was interested in is, do we see sort of people compensating? Maybe it's if I'm a hybrid worker, I'm having fewer of these interactions on the days I'm home, but then the days I'm in the office, I'm doing very little work because I'm just doing the informal interactions. And so maybe over that whole time period, I'm actually just sort of shifting when these informal things are happening, which I think maybe with variation in how frequently people are working from home, you might be able to actually capture and answer how much of this is sort of just shifting around versus total losses because I'm working from home.
Yeah, so to answer your first question, these were participants that we recruited on Prolific. They had to meet a very stringent criteria in order to constitute hybrid employees, and yeah, and we basically did the Diary study with those participants, but they were sourced on Prolific, and then yeah, we can get into details about how we verified their humanity versus their AI. The second question as to whether people are displacing some interactions across, so like, within a work week. Currently, I'm running sequential analysis to see if a particular day that's characterized by unusually high informal work interactions in the office, does that day tend to lead to or predispose subsequent days to not have those many informal interactions. Some pilot results suggests that there isn't like a very strong sequential effect, so people tend to be very clumpy in terms of having like Mondays will be the office day, and that's when I'll have my most informal work interactions, and Fridays are always work from home, so then I'll have like no, variation in my informal work interactions that day. And there are these like very, very strong temporal patterns that we see, and it's most likely a function of how the organization is like instructing employees to work from home. Yes, Nicholas, yeah.
Great, so really interesting. So 2 comments. One, oddly enough, I asked Eric Yuan why he cancelled work from home at Zoom, and he said, he's moved to hybrid, so just to be clear, so everyone's on the same page. So he said now the sales team has to come in Monday, Wednesday, the engineering team Tuesday, Thursday. He said we've grown so much there's not enough space in the office, which is why they come in on different. He said they don't overlap that much. And he said, look, most of our clients are hybrid. And his literal phrase is, we've got to eat our own lunch. So he said, look, our clients are hybrid. It was unclear whether, that was his explanation for it, which is partly like, but it would be consistent with your thing, but it's partly this is how people are using it. On the psych safety, one interpretation, which, I was at McKinsey, and even now, is that you kind of pre-vet stuff. So certainly when I was at McKinsey, if you were going to present something sensitive, what you would do is kind of walk the hallways a bit and check in with people kind of informally. You'd see them in the coffee room and say, hey, I was going to say this in the meeting, is that okay? And that would be very consistent with your findings. And you don't need to pre-vet with everyone. You just, you're going to present to 20 people and you run it by 3 or 4 people in the room informally, and they're okay with it. Whereas on Zoom, you may not have that chance to do it. And I guess that would at least be part of the explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was not, Zoom is a great technology. It's just like with all video conferencing technologies, one has to plan the meeting in advance. And that just takes away the opportunity to have informal work interactions. I know some companies have experimented with just having like office hours where one leaves their Zoom on and people run into others. But yeah, just thoughts about how these technologies can be better designed. Yes.
Few clarifying questions.
Yeah.
So is this all comparing within person? That it's like comparing their informal interactions? Yes. Okay, that's helpful to know. And then did you ask them in the beginning, like, just what their schedule was? I guess I just could be worried that, like, on a day that you don't feel great about your colleagues, you might decide to work from home. And so do you know, like, this is my normal days that I work from home versus work in the office?
Yeah. We have data on what their planned schedule is for the week that we collected data from.
Okay, yeah, that might just be useful to check.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Are you familiar with Jessica Methott's paper on small talk? It's in the Academy Management Journal, and it talks about small talk as a ritual, and that it leads to positive emotions while working, and then that helps people with OCB. But she has a measure, and it seems that this idea of small talk and office chit-chat is something that uplifts people emotionally while working, and it seems very relevant to your paper.
Yeah, definitely have heard about that paper. I think it's extensively cited in our working paper. I don't think that paper distinguishes between informal work interactions versus just like general small talk about life. Perhaps it does, but yeah, thank you for the...
They define it as talk not related to task completion.
Okay. Let's chat more about that. Yes, sir. Yeah.
I'm glad you're working on this, but it's such a complex terrain, and I find the conclusions people draw to are very much related to their prior. So I want to make a couple of observations. First, it's not even clear a priori whether missing out on ad hoc interactions is a net plus or minus. There's an opportunity cost of time, the small talk, chit chat, and so on. And there's a greater opportunity to choose whom I interact with when I'm working remotely than when I don't. So I got to trade off the water cooler conversation about the football game versus I can remote talk to Nick, and that might be more productive if he's having a good day. Second point is there's just tremendous variability in that opportunity cost trade-off across persons and organizations. Okay, if you are in an environment where the small talk is going to be highly productive for you, well, that's great. But that depends very much on the environment you're in, the stage of your career, and so on. I can't help but think of, we just had a 2-day conference honoring Thomas Sowell. Okay, the man has published 40 books between the age of 40 and 95. Much of that time he's writing 8 newspaper columns a month. The guy is famous for never being seen at the office. Okay, so he's an extreme example, but I just want to point out there is heterogeneity, and even some people find the small talk stressful and annoying. So again, I think we have to understand there's just tremendous heterogeneity here across organizations and people, and so there's danger in just focusing on conditional means, even though that's the obvious place to start. Other comment is this: I buy the basic idea that feelings of psychological safety contribute to positive communications in interaction. But that is also something that managers need to think about cultivating in what is now a very different work environment that than the one they grew up in, especially the senior managers. And it seems evident some senior managers just can't really conceive of how to replicate in a hybrid or mostly remote environment many of the good things that they associated with from traditional working arrangements. So the adaptation, what I like about your stuff is you're looking at the social adaptation process to these technological innovations, and as you correctly point out, that's likely to take place over time. But the organizational adaptation and the managerial adaptation may be even slower working.
Yes. Yeah, the second point, I totally agree with. The first one, the conditional means were used as, so we did do a heterogeneity analysis. So there were person-specific slopes, and we looked at the distribution. I should have had a graph of that, but essentially it's the distribution's mean is positive, and yes, the tails are a bit long. So there are folks for whom there is just either no effect or even a negative quote-unquote association between having interactions and reporting lower psychological safety. But for the vast majority of the people in our sample, it was a positive association. But great points. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I have 2 comments and maybe questions. The first one is, can you do more on the mechanisms? To what extent it is peer-to-peer interaction or manager-to-peer interaction? Because that knowing more about the mechanisms would really tell us a kind of coherent story. And then I think the second point, I thought that things like psychological safety, trust, culture, they are very slow-moving variables. So it will take a few, maybe months, maybe years to basically observe. So related to this, to what extent you are worried about experimenter-driven effect or desirability bias? Because you see some fairly strong effects there now.
Yeah, we have, so for both the points that you raised, we have data to address. There were no meaningful differences in psychological safety after interactions with different types of partners stratified on seniority. So people reported roughly the same level of psych safety with peers as compared to when they had interactions with peers as compared to when they interacted with their managers. Number 2, the entirety of one of the pilot studies, I shouldn't really call it pilot because it was like a big 400-person, 1-week, same design study that basically sought to establish sought to examine if there was variance in psychological safety over the short term. And there were a whole host of statistical tests and discriminant validity tests, construct validity tests that were performed. And the only conclusion that we arrived, we could confidently say that this construct was varying meaningfully over short periods of time. Its nomological network with other associated constructs was also varying meaningfully over that time period. So that was one of our propelling arguments in the paper, is that we should reconceptualize this construct as more labile over the short term. But yeah, happy to chat more about it. Thank you.